This is Real Oregon Lifestyle with Andrea and Jenn Fiddler, two licensed real estate brokers who share their love of all things Oregon.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Fay.
I'm Jenn Fiddler.
And welcome to Real Oregon Lifestyle. Today, you're in for a very scary episode, especially before Halloween. We've got some really fun stories about haunted houses. Everyone asks us, do you ever experience a real haunted house? And so we've got some good stories for you there. But first, we're going to talk about something even more scary. And that's our election right now and how that affects the real estate market. We get a lot of these questions right now, and we definitely see a change in buyer and seller activity around this time. But we've got some great information to share with you, and it will show you that, right now this is normal for this time. So Andy, let's go ahead and look at the graphs that we've got up right now. Those are side by side of the Willamette Valley and the Portland metro area. And as you can see, they start off actually in the 2000s. So back in the 2000s, you can actually go through time and you can see when everything, pricing wise went up, and then we had the downturn back in like 2008. And then, of course, at the very end of the graph, that's where we're at right now. So just to put into perspective, you can see the lines at the very bottom towards the end of the graph, those are inventory. And then at the top, that's what's going under contract. So Andy, if you want to flip to the next graph, we'll kind of put it a little bit more into today's perspective. And so this goes back a couple years. You can see like those waves on the graph, those are the natural cycles of the real estate market. Typically what we see is in the spring and summer months, we ramp up with listings and those listings go under contract. And then when we get back into the fall and winter months, that goes back down again. So you can see that wave. What's really cool about this graph, and thank you, let me give a shout out to Amerititle. I took a great class from them last week. We're always trying to educate ourselves in real estate, and they put on a fantastic class all about the market right now and statistics and where we see it going. So this is one that they shared in that class. It was awesome. But you can see back in the spring when we had our pandemic reaction, and they've highlighted that on the graph, and you can see that there was definitely a dip in listings and homes going under contract. That darker blue, that's newly listed. So those are usually going to be a little bit higher on the graph than what's going under contract. And but as you can see, there's not a whole lot of difference there. There's as many homes are going under contract as they are listed just about. And then you can also see towards the end in September when we had our wildfires, that definitely slowed things down. It was a little bit harder for people to list and get in contract, although we were still doing that at that time. I had a new listing right in the middle of the smoke, and we still had showings, and I still got 8 offers on that house. So it was crazy.
Hey, as a non-real estate person, I'm noticing that September and October of this year are not seeing the same kind of dip that we've seen in 18 and 19.
That is correct. So what we want to point out in this is real estate has its normal cycle. And history shows that it doesn't actually matter who is elected. The real estate cycle is still going to continue to do its cycle. And even like right now, like we actually have what they're calling interruptions in the cycle. So the pandemic is an interruption in the cycle, and the wildfires were also an interruption in the cycle. And so you'll see some differences in that, and that's just based on people's reaction to what's happening around them. And but we don't view that as a typical market or a typical part of the cycle. And what usually happens is after those periods are over, that cycle will continue to go back to the normal cycle again. So if you want to go to the next one, you can actually see there's a couple lines that were drawn on this graph that really show that this one goes back to, I think this one goes back to 2000 also. I can't see that far, but
Goes back 2005.
2005, close enough. But you can see where there's that ebbing and flowing of the market, and we're still seeing that same thing. We're just seeing an interruption right now. What that means is, regardless of who's elected, we're still going to see that same cycle continue. Jen, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And Andy, I was going to jump in and say that you picked up on something which was interesting in that 2018, September of 2018 versus this year. What was going on right then was that rates happened to be a little bit on the higher side. So that does have some effect on this graph as well. So I purchased my home in the fall of 2018. Rates were at like 5.25 or something like that. When rates drop to, the high twos, that makes a huge difference. And you will see little spikes in inventory when there are higher rates. So with the way that rates have been and factored with low inventory, you're seeing some trending here on the graphs, which accounts for kind of what you're seeing and what we're predicting to happen in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating stuff, you guys. I mean, sorry, anybody that's listening to the audio version, please do go out and take a look at these photos on realorganlifestyles.com. But just looking at what's happening during the trend in 2020, that is really fascinating. I cannot believe how close the lines are between listed and newly under contract.
Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit more in our next episode. We've got some good stats and stuff next time, so we'll dive a little bit deeper next time. But it is pretty crazy. We're seeing a number, we're seeing pretty much anything that's listed is going under contract. And I think that, if I remember correctly, we're pretty close to about 1 month of inventory left. So that means it would, if no listings were brought to the market today, we would have 1 month to sell all of those and clear them all out. That's not very much inventory, and so that's why we're still seeing prices go up. And we're seeing that, as a percentage, it's going to be 100% or over asking price. So if you're a buyer out there, that's just what you're in for. And so if you're prepared and you know what that kind of looks like, then it's not quite as scary.
Yeah, for sure. I think, to kind of bring this back to a real life example, because sometimes we can overwhelm people and we nerd out on stats and stuff as real estate agents. I think the main thing to keep in mind is that, like you said, it doesn't really matter who is the president at the time. It didn't seem to have an effect on the market. What happened in 2008 was the cause of a financial crisis and corrupt loans and things like that. And I've heard from a lot of people who have asked me questions. Well, what do you think is going to happen after the election? And if you look at it from a simple supply and demand economic background, we don't have enough homes for the demand. And so therefore, supply and demand dictates the market. There isn't anything or anyone that's going to come into the presidency and change that unless we get a lot more homes on the market. And I know just in the Portland metro market that we have, still about 40,000 people that are going to be moving into the area, and there are not 40,000 houses being built right now. So again, simple supply and demand, it's not going to change things. I follow a lot of economists who say that rates are going to stay good through 2021 at least. So that's also going to keep things really competitive as well.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's interesting, if we go back in history, I actually did take a look at some of this, and it doesn't actually matter who is elected. And people they get really, really hyped up about this right now, especially when real estate is concerned. And it really doesn't matter. There have been Democrats, there have been Republicans, and both have had good and bad economies. So when it comes to real estate, we're really looking at, what's unemployment looking like right now. And we did see that there was some, a lot of unemployment, especially early on in the spring. But we're also seeing that a lot of people have gotten jobs since then. So the unemployment rate has gone down, especially in Oregon. Oregon actually was not impacted nearly as much. And so we're actually in a really good place in Oregon because unemployment has gone down. And we're really, I also, in that class that I took, it was awesome because they were talking about rents and how that's been affecting rental property as well. And for the majority of people, they have confidence that they're going to be paying their rent and their mortgages. So we're really sitting pretty well through this whole thing.
Yeah. One thing too, just to kind of fit into the picture of how cyclical real estate is, even with the ups and downs of the market, the Federal Housing Administration tracks trends over a period of time. So say you purchased a house in 1991 for $100,000. In the Portland metro market, that should be worth $274,000 now. So even with the ups and downs in the market, you can see that over time, real estate is a really solid long-term investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in a nutshell, it shouldn't be quite as scary as everybody's making it out to be. And regardless of who wins the election, everything's going to be okay. So,
Yeah.
but you know what? So speaking of scary, we should talk about some of our fun little experiences that we've had going in houses. And we've had, we get to go in all kinds of houses. I mean, probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of houses. It's crazy. But what's cool is there are some houses, I don't know, maybe cool is not the right word. Maybe scary is the better word. But there are some times when we go in houses and you get this feeling and you do not want to be in that house anymore. And
Yep.
I'll tell at least my little story. I had a home that was listed. This was a couple years ago. And in that house, there had been a suicide. And that was a really tough one. I ended up working with the family and they ended up buying that home back from the bank. So it was not anything that was ever seen on the market, but it was something that I did to help the family out. And in that, though, yes, I did know that there was a suicide, but every time I went in that house, it was cold. It was creepy. It was just an ordinary house, but the feeling that you get out of that house, it was awful. I never wanted to be in that house and I just always wanted to leave. Um, Jen, do you have any like that you've experienced too?
Yeah, I wasn't really ever a believer in haunted houses or houses having energy or anything like that until I got into real estate. And there is something unexplainable. You can walk into a certain house and it has a certain energy and a certain vibe that you're just like, ugh, there's something about this I am not okay with and I'm not comfortable with. And over the course of the years, I've heard all kinds of different stories from people. But I actually had a house listed. It was built in the 30s, I believe. And the guy that I was working with had lived in the house for about 30 years. And he and his partner had lived there together. When his partner passed away, which is about probably 5-10 years prior to me listing the house, he just lived there alone. And it was time for him to move on to something else. I didn't like that house and I couldn't figure out why, because it was on a cool street in a hip neighborhood in Portland. It was classically beautiful, everything you think about of like a Portland bungalow, just a gorgeous house. And I just couldn't put my finger on it. So I was there one day doing an open house and I could not wait to get out of there. It was 2 hours and it was the longest 2 hours of my life. And I just kind of was pacing around the kitchen and stuff. And I could have sworn that the cabinets were all closed in the kitchen. And I turned around and one of the cabinet doors was open. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe I opened it and just forgot to shut it or something along those lines. Or maybe somebody that came through the open house opened it and forgot to shut it. And so the owner ended up coming near the end of the open house. And I was kind of telling him about the open house and everything. And he just out of the blue says, well, my house is haunted, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's not me that was crazy about this cabinet door? And he goes, oh no, my partner does that. He opens the kitchen cabinet doors at night. And I'm like, oh my God, what? And so now I'm kind of freaking out. So his partner used to smoke. And he said he would be like, to this day, laying in bed at night, and he would just get this overwhelming smell of cigarettes by the bed. And nobody had smoked in the house for over 10 years, anything like that. The house didn't even remotely smell like cigarettes. But he said it would just fill the room with this cigarette smell, and then it would go away and it wouldn't be there in the morning. And he said he woke up several times with what he thought was his partner standing over his bed. And oh my gosh, he just told me all kinds of crazy stories. And that house also had a creepy basement, and I hated going in that basement too. And I couldn't tell you why. I didn't want to even ask after I heard about that. But that's probably my most scary open house story that I have.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that is he didn't tell you the house was haunted. It just in passing. Oh yeah, well my house is haunted.
Yeah.
Super casual about it.
Probably not. Well, for one thing, we don't have to disclose that, and probably something you don't want to tell the person who's going to be alone at the open house hosting it and, all freaked out about. But, in the hindsight, it was pretty funny, and thinking about it was kind of funny. And it was a really, really difficult transaction. We had a lot of repairs and things like that. So I definitely celebrated when that one was done.
So, okay, I have a question for you. I've heard that there's a neighborhood up in the Portland area that has been known for haunted houses, and that they've actually had to bring in like psychics or people to like cleanse the homes or whatever. Is this true?
Oh, I don't know about this, but I know that Wilsonville has a lot of history of weird stuff going on. And it was the old state hospital grounds that Villebois was built on. So a lot of the houses in Villebois have weird things happen. I have friends that live there. I've sold houses there. And there's a lady in the neighborhood who comes in and does like cleansing of the houses for people because of the weird stuff they've happened. A friend of mine said she went downstairs one time and her garage door was open and her car was turned on, but nobody else was home. The kids weren't home. She thought maybe the kids got a hold of the keys and turned on the car or something like that. I mean, she was in bed. So she had weird stuff like that happen, but
Creepy.
Yeah. What's really interesting is this was several years ago, sold a house for a friend of mine, and his dad had passed away in the house, and it didn't have a creepy vibe or anything like that. But the owner who inherited the house kept telling me, he's like, I can feel my dad's spirit here. And I, in passing, mentioned this to our mutual real estate coach, Garrett. It was just one of those hard weeks and stuff. And he goes, oh, you need to call Auntie Joni. And I'm like, okay, who's Auntie Joni? So his aunt actually goes around and helps people cleanse houses all over California. So he gave me her email address, and I sent her an email, and I'm like, hey, what would you do? What's the formula for cleansing this house? And she just sent me back a message and said, I have contacted, I can't remember the guy's name, John's spirit, and I've told him it's okay to leave the house. I'm like, okay, whatever. So she sent me then a formula for like, if John comes back, this is how you release his spirit again, but he should be gone. So I sent it to the seller, and I'm like, okay, I'm just passing this information along. They went back to the house that night and said the house had a completely different energy and different feel.
Wow. So that's interesting to me. And also the fact that there's a recipe out there to rid spirits from houses. I think that we've all experienced some weird stuff here and there. I haven't had any like cabinet doors and stuff opened on me. Thankful for that, because I think I would freak out pretty easily.
So couple quick thoughts, you guys.
Mhm.
So first of all, that house, Jen, that you're talking about, in hindsight, building it on an Indian burial ground, maybe not the right way to go.
Yeah, probably not.
Future reference for people building.
Scooby-Doo is what tells us to not do this. Scooby-Doo is amazing at telling us not to build on an Indian burial ground. I mean, we should know. This has been going on. What, Scooby-Doo's been around since the 70s and 80s?
Right, exactly.
I mean, good information.
Second of all, are we going to start experiencing homes that have like, yeah, my partner was a heavy vapor and always listen to Fall Out Boys. And so now at night, I'll swear I can hear Fall Out Boys, and I smell cotton candy mango.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious, Andy.
So speaking of Portland, though, there are some very haunted areas in Portland, and one of the most haunted areas in Oregon is the Shanghai tunnels. I'm sure you guys have heard of that before,
Yes.
but I have to wonder now, talking about neighborhoods in Portland, you know, there were some very shady things that were happening in the 1800s because this is a port city. I think it's very possible that we have some very haunted areas in Portland.
Oh, big time. Yeah. No, I've heard of it. I have never actually been in the Shanghai tunnels. Who has been actually in them?
I have. It's creepy.
Sweet. I should go there.
Yeah, back before COVID, you could do these tours. I think I did one actually on Halloween, and it starts near Dan and Louie's Oyster Bar down there in kind of Chinatown area, and then you do a walking tour. You end up at going through part of the tunnel. I can't remember exactly what part of the tunnel it is, and you also end up at the Benson Hotel because that's super haunted. And they have a whole book of people who've stayed there and experienced things. It's definitely worth doing. It's kind of cheesy. They give you these little ghost detectors that you carry around and stuff. And my ghost detector was going off when I was in the Shanghai tunnel. But to be fair, there was some stuff that was a little bit unexplainable. One of the ladies in our group said she felt like somebody was standing behind her, and she felt a very cold energy behind her. I mean, it was cold down there anyway, but it was kind of above and beyond that. So I don't know. It's definitely weird. It's definitely creepy. And another plug.
That same feeling is what I felt in the suicide house. I mean,
Yeah.
it's weird. It's a weird feeling, and I don't know. It makes you want to leave like immediately.
Oh yeah, I couldn't wait to get out of that Shanghai tunnel. It was like, okay, I'm good. I believe in ghosts. Let's get out of here.
I know it's a little bit off topic, but which is worse than having a cold spot in a haunted house or a warm spot in a public pool?
Ooh.
Warm spot in a public pool.
Definitely. Sure. Hands down.
Yeah.
Hands down. Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully, I mean, so those homes up in Villebois, those are all new construction. So just FYI out there, if you are a believer in ghosts, then probably new construction is not going to help you. But it sounds like you can cleanse your house. So there's always a solution in real estate.
See, we got a solution for everything. We got our Auntie Jonies and our recipes. We can help with haunted houses too.
Yeah. Well, the next time I'm in a house and it smells like chocolate chip cookies and sage, I'll know that there's some big issues.
Yeah.
The chocolate chip cookies. I mean, let's go ahead and sell that house, right? The sage, that I would definitely question that. Yeah. Well,
I think one thing I'll mention, last real estate story for you. I sold a house. I had the listing. They were some very not nice, very rude people that ended up being very difficult, very awful to the buyer, very awful to both the buyer's agent and myself. And the people who were buying it were just amazing, just super sweet. The buyer's agent didn't really tell her buyer everything that was going on and what my clients were putting her through. And she and I had a very good relationship. And, obviously I'm working on behalf of my client, but at the same time, there's a point when they're asking me to do things that I can't legally do. They were asking me to do things that I was just like, no, if you want to sell your house, I'm not your girl. So anyway, it all worked out in the end. She went in there and saged the house for him before they moved in, and I had to go back there to get a couple things. And what's that?
The agent saged the house?
She did. And it actually did have a different feel after that. I actually am a believer in the sage, and whether it's mental or not, or it's part of that whole cleansing thing that's in your mind, whatever it is, like if that helps you feel better, okay. But I actually do believe in that as a formula for getting rid of bad energy out of a house, because I've seen it happen in person. Open your windows, sage everything, and just start fresh.
My experience, but probably before my real estate experience is, I didn't really believe in ghosts. I'm like, oh, well, maybe, there's some weird stuff that's happened, but it was always in question, right? And ever since the suicide house, that one, I really, just the feeling I got from it alone was enough to make me a believer. And I never saw a ghost. Like, I didn't think I needed to see one. Just the energy from that house. That house definitely could have used that. I don't know if they ever cleansed it or not, but it's weird. You can't really, as an agent, be like, oh, so by the way, I would totally recommend saging this house. It's like something that's on our list of recommendations.
Yeah. I think more and more people are really into energy and having their space feel a certain way. At least I know a lot of people that are. And it's not to say that if somebody dies in a house that it's going to automatically have a bad energy. I had a situation several years ago where the person did actually commit suicide in a very, I know this is going to sound weird, but a very thoughtful way, as not to be a burden to his family. He was single. And it actually didn't have a bad energy about it. It felt still like a warm, nice house. And, that just because somebody died in a house doesn't mean it's necessarily going to have a bad energy.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah. Well, at least we know that regardless of what the situation is, there's always a solution for a scary problem in real estate. So, today, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you all for joining us. And you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and realoregonlifestyle.com. I'll definitely be posting those stats.
Thank you.
You.